in verse 20, when the elders in Jerusalem, remember these are the elders of the early church, when they heard it, they rejoiced, praising God. And then they said something interesting. They said to Paul, "You see, brother, how many thousands of Jews have believed." So now you've got the contrast. Paul is coming back with the report of evangelism amongst the Gentiles. When he gets back to Jerusalem, the Jewish leaders are saying, look at the thousands of Jews who have been converted. And now this is the problem. And you've got to look at this verse 20. You see, they're praising Paul because of the work amongst the Gentiles. Then they say, brother, look how many thousands of Jews have believed, and all of them are keeping the law. The Mosaic law. So you've got a very clear situation here, that the early church, centered in Jerusalem with the elders, is indicating that amongst the Jewish converts, that they are still keeping Mosaic law. Right. But verse 21, here's the problem, because they say to Paul, these thousands of Jewish believers have been told that you, Paul, teach all the Jews who live among Gentiles to turn away from Mosaic law, telling them not to circumcise their children or live according to our customs. Now, this is quite critical here, because what they're doing in effect is accusing Paul. Yes, they're accusing him that he's teaching that Jews, or even Jewish converts, must turn away from Mosaic law, and telling them not to live according to the Jewish custom. So verse 22, these leaders of the new church, of the first church, say, what shall we do? Because these Jewish converts in Jerusalem will know that you are here. Verse 23. So what do we have to tell you? So here you've got the leaders of the, I'm trying to make this clear, you've got the leaders of the early church in Jerusalem challenging Paul. Wow. So in verse 23, they say, what do we tell you? And then they say, there are 4 men with us who have made a vow. In other words, that they have agreed to accept the Mosaic law. These are 4 specific converts who have been identified, that they are prepared as converts to conform to the law. So what they say, the Jewish leaders say to Paul, verse 24, take these men, join in their purification rites, pay their expenses so that they can have their head shaved. So in other words, they're challenging Paul to go and take 4 recent converts and let them obey the Jewish laws, Mosaic laws. And then, this is their comment, when you do this, then everybody will know there's no truth in these reports about you, but that you yourself are living in obedience to Mosaic law. Well, we know that Paul was a Jew. He was the strictest. He was taught by Gamaliel. He was of the Pharisees. That's one of the Jewish sects, the very religious sect. So his background is very religious, so religious that this is the Paul who, when Christ died and the people were converted after the day of Pentecost, he was the one who was arresting the converts, arresting all these messianic converts, stood and saw Stephen being stoned to death, and was on his way to Damascus with orders from the Jewish courts to arrest believers in Damascus. So he's being challenged to join these four to demonstrate that he's living in obedience to Mosaic law. Verse 25. As for the Gentile believers, now this first part is dealing with converts from Orthodox Jews. Now it says in verse 25, as for the Gentile believers, that is Paul's converts, come on, we've written to them our decision. I need you to see what is happening here. It's very clear that the whole of the early church, with its Jewish converts and its Gentile converts, is under jurisdiction from Jerusalem. And these leaders in Jerusalem said, we have written to them, giving them our decision. And the decision is that although the Gentiles don't have to be circumcised and obey all Jewish purification laws, but they should abstain from food sacrificed to idols, from blood, from the meat of strangled animals, and from sexual immorality. I personally believe that we should basically keep to that as well ourselves. In fact, not deliberately because it says in the scripture, but I do abstain from meat offered to food offered to idols. Well, of course, we don't get much chance to eat that. I do abstain from blood and from the meat of strangled animals. Well, nowadays there's so much controversy with the Muslims and the Jews over animals. It's extremely difficult to know exactly what we are eating. Sexual immorality, of course, it's obvious. So it's quite clear the difference between Paul taking these four Jewish converts to adhere to Mosaic law, and the leaders, the elders of the church in Jerusalem, telling the Gentiles it's restricted to these simple things. But you've got to see the influence that is coming. I mean, this is why this is important, because what you're looking at is the birth of the original church, and what you're looking at is the way that the church is now accepting Jews and Gentiles, and that Jewish converts and Gentile converts are treated differently. Absolutely clear. So in verse 26, we come to the next day. Paul took the men, purified himself with them, went to the temple to give notice of the date when the days for the purification would end, and so on. Now, I'm going to have to end there because of the time. So Paul has done what the elders requested. And you need to follow in the next message what takes place from there.